there's a lot of your work that says quite a lot of interesting things about the 20th century. Certainly the first thing that sprung to mind was From Hell. There's an idea in From Hell, which was a big inspiration for my KLF book. But the idea was that the act of Jack the Ripper was what gave birth to the 20th century. I was just curious where that idea came from.
Well, that was my conceit that resolved a lot of the material that had emerged during my research into From Hell.
Okay.
When I was just looking into the 1880s, I noticed all of these things that had happened. I think in 1882, Michelson and Morley actually performed the experiments which were meant to iron out a couple of last wrinkles in the theory of the ether, but ended up completely disproving that ether existed, which was a kind of result, but not the one that they were looking for. You'd got France going into Indochina. You had got the beginnings of the modern art movement with Walter Sickert. You'd got some of the first kind of modern realist writings with people like Emile Zola. You'd got a surprising amount of focusing upon prostitutes in literature and the arts. And all of these things which had gone on to really colour and shape the 20th century. And then in 1888, these senseless, violent murders, it just seemed to me that symbolically I could kind of position the Jack the Ripper murders as the birth throes of the 20th century, with Jack the Ripper as a kind of really ghastly midwife.
Hello everyone, welcome to Struggle Session Presents Alan Moore. I am your host, Leslie Lee III. The Whitechapel murders committed by the unknown subject known as Jack the Ripper. It's one of the most infamous crimes of all time, and it has remained unsolved until today. I have assembled a crack team of mind hunters, and we will, for the first time on this podcast, be revealing who is Jack the Ripper. With the help of Alan Moore's and Ellie Campbell's classic comic book, From Hell. Today, I am joined, as always, by the host of Jack AM, Jack Allison.
What's happening? I'm excited to do some mind hunting. Always a good time to do some mind hunting.
And Will Menaker of Chapo Trap House.
Hello, boys. It's good to be here. I'm actually coming to you live right now. I'm doing the soy face pointing thing, but towards a Masonic temple. This is the true crime hour.
You know, people do say that Chapo Trap House birthed the 21st century. That is a thing that people are saying.
For better or for worse, as Dr. William Gull says.
All right, so let's get into it. From Hell, the book about Jack the Ripper that from the first page tells you who the fuck Jack the Ripper is, and is still the most interesting thing you'll ever read about any sort of serial killing thing, almost, I think. Absolutely impeccable work, from the art to the storytelling to the fact that 95% of the stuff in here is true and documented. If I have the annotated edition, I can save you the trouble if you don't. Every single page, you just turn back and it says, yeah, this shit actually happened. This happened. This happened. This happened. He only messes with a few things to get the royal conspiracy in, which is the most ludicrous theory of who Jack the Ripper is. But otherwise, just an impeccable work, and I absolutely adore it.
I would say it's also probably like, in addition to like the most interesting thing that's ever been done about serial killers, I think like as far as historical fiction goes, it's one of the most fascinating and, as you said, historically accurate kind of psychological and historical portraits of the Victorian era, or like the end of the Victorian era in England.
Yeah, it really, and I honestly think that, you know, it kind of works better for the artistic license that he's able to take. You know what I mean? Like, it almost like is able to pull you into that place and give you, you know, bigger ideas to sort of grapple with about murder and about that era that maybe he couldn't have if he stuck, you know, strictly to fact only.
Yeah, so Will, you mentioned this is a book about the Victorian era, which is when these the Jack the Ripper killings take place. And what this book emphasizes that isn't emphasized all the time is just the abject horror of day-to-day life on the East End of London, while at the same time, like, this is in the middle of the heart of the greatest empire that the world has ever seen. At least that's what they fucking say, right? Like, at the same time, like, on the West End, while Jekyll and Hyde was playing, all the posh people were going to the theater to see this ghastly play about this doctor turned bad. On the East End, like, actual women are being chopped up, having their throat slit, and murdered, and Jack the Ripper is maybe not even the top 5 problems that they actually have in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, like, it captures the horrific poverty and misery of life on the East End, in the heart, and in the heart of what at the time was the biggest and richest empire in the world. It reminds me a lot of Jack London's, one of his books of nonfiction called People of the Abyss.
Of the Abyss, yes.
Yeah, where like he went over and attempted to live in the East End and like get a job, and just like it's an astonishing book of reporting on like just the conditions of poverty at like the very beginning of the 20th century in London.
And From Hell even pulls back a little bit, because like there's just a mention of like the seeing children having sex on the streets. You don't see the fact that you don't see as many of the houses where families are living, 8 people in an 8x8, where they live their whole lives there. There's a quote from a book I was reading called The Five, about the Jack the Ripper killings by Hallie Rubenholz, a brand new book. And they mention that, you would be like, there was 4 kids who were found in the bed sleeping with the corpse of their brother who was waiting to be buried. Families would use the bathroom in the same room, have sex in the same room, that you're on the same bed that your children are sleeping on. There was no privacy, and often you were having sex with a sibling. There was just no privacy. And this is like, the workhouses were worse, like there was so much like suffering and distress, and people in other parts of the UK, other parts of London, just pretending it didn't happen, didn't talk about it. All right, so let's dive into the plot of From Hell, which, for a book about, the most infamous crime of all time, so we'll document, the plot is fairly straightforward. He gives it to you fairly early on in the first few pages. Prince Eddie, our Victoria's special little boy has been, slumming it on the East End with a nice shopkeeper girl who unfortunately is Catholic, and so when they get married and have a child, that's a big
Catholic
problem.
priest preside over their wedding.
Yes, that's a big
making their child now a papist who is like in line for the house of the ruling family of England, that's a no-no. That's a big no-no.
And that simply won't do. So Victoria just straight up puts the hit out, and I love the drawing of her. She's like almost like kind of like Jabba the Hutt, just giving these like all orders off to her fucking minions. And Dr. Gold, who is the main thing we learn about him that Moore wants to hammer in is that he's a fucking Mason. Mason. The Masons in the royal family did the Jack the Ripper slayings. That's what we were told in the first few pages, that's what happened.
Yeah, there's not a lot of mystery here. I mean, the mystery in the book is so cool because like it tells you it tells you what the conspiracy is in the first chapter, and it develops it on it from there. But like the mystery in the book comes from an interior psychological profile of Dr. William Gull himself, because he is tasked with lobotomizing this woman and then killing her friends, but these acts of murder that he's tasked with doing on behalf of Queen Victoria for himself take on an entirely different and mythic cast that becomes about something totally different than like what the royal family or even the Masons require of him. And like as the murders develop and his tenuous attachment to sanity continues to slip away from him, like the real mystery is what he is actually hoping to achieve with these murders.
So the real life Dr. Gold, the main thing that kind of eliminates him as a suspect is the fact that he suffered a stroke and he was an old man. But Alan Moore actually flips this and said, what if the stroke was actually a theophany and he had he had seen Jubilon?
Jubilon is real.
Is that not something that actually the Masons in their old beliefs used to believe?
Yes, it actually is a real Masonic thing. That was and is I don't know if it came up contemporaneously with the case, but Alan Moore isn't pulling this out of thin air, and he decides that if he's tasked with killing several women, he might as well make a day out of it, and decides to conduct a ritual to ensure that that there remains a patriarchy in the 21st century, because he's afraid that since he believes women ruled over men for millions of years in the age of prehistory and unreason, and male reason is the only thing has only started to take hold of humanity, and he needs to conduct this ritual, this Masonic occult ritual with these murders to push back the feminine, chaotic feminine force.
He needs to slay the female dragon, basically.
Yes.
And like the city of London itself plays a huge role in this, because like the places where he actually conducts, like where like he murders these women, and like I think probably one of the most amazing chapters of the book is when he takes his carriage driver, who is his accomplice in these murders, and he takes him basically on
his Renfield. Yeah,
he takes him on like a walking tour of London about like the occult architectural sort of like, I don't know, ley lines and like nexuses of energy, which are like, all of these obelisks and historical landmarks have been like literally built over like to sort of consecrate and conquer like England's pagan and matriarchal history, and like and bring forth like modern England modernity, and like the power of monarchy, patriarchy, and like as what he's trying to accomplish, the creation of the modern world.
And the creepiest fucking thing is that like it's like actually true. Like a bunch of people did die bringing those obelisks that are thousands of years old to England for whatever fucking reason, and they are laid about this. It's fucking bizarre. It actually is bizarre, and it's weird to me that Alan Moore is like the only person in the UK who like talks about this. It seems, at least that filters over to the US. Like there's so much weird shit and weird factoids, and like he I think it's mentioned in From Hell a few times, the pirate hanging areas. I don't know where they hung the pirates where I lived at, but it would seem like it would freak me out. I mean, this is what Alan Moore gets into Jerusalem and everything else. Like these places where these atrocities take place, there must be some kind of power still there, or something still there, lingering.
It's that, like, it's not just the act of murder itself. It's like the power comes from even centuries later, like the consecration of those murders through this kind of covert and totally like a power that you're unaware of, the covert powers of architecture itself, which is like really one of the most fascinating parts about this book. And, you know, like whether it's about Hawksmoor's Church in Whitechapel, and then
that church is an antagonist in the book.
Yeah,
it's like church building.
It's like a really malevolent presence, and I've been there, and it's a very interesting church. It's very cool. But yeah, but not just the architecture of the city of London itself and its churches and obelisks and buildings, which exert this what is very clear, this totally oppressive fucking energy on like every human being who lives within its boundaries, of just this infinite, universal, and cosmic oppression from like the rulers on like the livestock that they fucking lord their power over. But even grander than that is that like a lot of the book is through this idea of architecture, the book and William Gull himself sort of narrates a lot of Moore's own ideas about time as a spatial dimension, and that the universe and time itself has an architecture to it that we are acted upon but unaware of.
Yeah, I mean, in it's almost I hadn't read before, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but the sort of afterword to the afterword I hadn't read before, and I did think it was interesting. There was even images of Alan Moore going to these places, and they were very like reminiscent of that sequence when Gull was going to these places. You know, I feel like this might have been some sort of signaling. You know, these are some of his ideas.
I mean, if there's a character that expresses ideas most in line with Alan Moore's, it is almost certainly Gull in this work.
Whereas Gull is trying to enslave humanity, where I think Alan Moore is trying to liberate us. But it's because he only understands the means through which human beings have become enslaved by occult power.
That is something that Gull says, because he's like, these gods don't exist, but they're all powerful, and that's why I used them. He laughs at the other Masons for actually believing in it, even though he knows the power. It's a very like strange way he phrases it, but he becomes such a fascinating character. And while I'm talking about this, I made the mistake of putting myself through the film adaptation.
The Hughes brothers,
Hell. Yeah, which is an abomination, but for maybe one sequence where what's the actor who plays he also plays like Bill the Hobbit as well,
Ian Holm.
His name, Ian Holm, as Gull, and once it's revealed that he's the murderer, and we see him having these like visions, and like you actually see the obelisk, and it looks like the comic book for like 3 minutes in the entire movie. I'm like, that's supposed to be the whole movie, not like Johnny Depp like following the cop.
It's funny. I mean, like you can see why they like for a movie they like totally changed it, because like, you know, like the movie withholds the mystery and even like misdirects you as to who you think the Jack the Ripper is really going to be. But they make the main character Johnny Depp, the psychic detective, who doesn't show up in From Hell until like the 8th or 9th chapter, and he's the one who cracks the case. But it is very clear that his psychic abilities, he's a complete charlatan, he's a complete fraud.
They combine the two characters. The psychic in the book is a royal psychic who was defrauding Victoria.
Oh, right,
and got in a fight with Gull.
Yes,
and he tells the detective Aberlane, who really doesn't do anything except like try to hustle and then get hustled by Mary Kelly. That's all he does in the entire book. So it makes even less sense to make the movie into like a detective mystery. And then Johnny Depp's character acts like he's read Silence of the Lambs, right? Like he's like the same detective from like CSI is like, what do we have here? When in fact, in the real case, and this is documented, someone had sent a letter to the detective suggesting that they put dust down on some of the items around that were found in the killing to find out the print of the fingers of the killer. And the cops told him to fuck off. That was stupid. And not till 17 years later.
Letter to the editor, someone was like inventing fingerprinting.
Yes. 17 years later, they start using it.
I also like in the Hughes brothers adaptation with Johnny Depp, the psychic Johnny Depp's psychic detective character. He has all of the sort of like the mind hunting, or remember like the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock Holmes, where he's like looking at stuff.
Yes,
and he's like he's doing the Minority Report things with like ideas in his brains. It's just like move that away, bring this one up. He's doing the Hannibal Will Graham thing, but he only accessed those psychic powers through smoking opium and drinking absinthe.
Oh, that was actually kind of cool. I actually liked that.
Holmes actually is in the books.
I mean, he is a morphine and cocaine addict in the original stories.
So From Hell, I know this is everybody's bagging on true crime now, but you're listening to this episode, aren't you, motherfucker? From Hell is a true crime story. And it
Maybe
is
the original true crime. Is there an earlier true crime sensation like this?
I mean, it had to be one of the first like series of murders or serial murders that became a global news story that like everybody knew about.
And this is one thing that Alan Moore has pulled from the Ripperologist is the term. I mean, there's been so many books written about Jack the Ripper, so many people investigating, so many theories. But one of the things that they do believe is that the letters, at least the first couple, were written by a newspaper man, because it was the Dear Boss is not addressed to the cops. It's actually addressed to like the boss at like the news agency. But people wouldn't know. The average person probably wouldn't even know what a news agency was back then. If you were like a crazed killer and you wanted to send a letter to somebody, you would send it to the local paper, not the distributor. It's like adding like the specific editor-in-chief on like like instead of like just the newspaper. You know what I'm saying? So they believe, and plus it's like whimsical and wordy. I think some people thought like Oliver Wilde like might have written them because they were like a depraved killer is just not like writing like double entendre poetry to the papers. That's just not something that happens.
Yeah, a little bit of fake news.
The original, it was the original fake news, and the reason, and it did become a huge sensation because people were just getting murdered in the neighborhood in really brutal ways, even by modern standards. The comic book is absolutely like shows the gory details of this, which I think if like Jack the Ripper happened now, like it would be like still the biggest news story just because of how horrific the crimes were. And people on the East End would like sell tickets out the back of their windows when the bodies would show up because people want to see like the investigation. And like this is, you know, back in the day where like what an ambulance was two guys with a stretcher and you had to run and find them. So it would take like, you know, 30 minutes to get the ambulance, you had to walk to go get the coroner, all this shit. So it'd be like several hours of like show. Like you will watch, basically it was CSI Live for those people, but the cops had no idea what they were doing. Like most of the time they would wash the body first thing to, you know,
let's get all this evidence out of here. This is gross.
Yeah, let's get all this. Yeah, this is gross. This is creeping this out. So From Hell as a true crime comic shows that the cops have been, always will be completely fucking useless to the people and won't help you. It won't do anything at all.
Not just useless. It's not just that cops can't read. It's also in From Hell. It makes it clear that the cops have been suborned to this entire fucking.
Yes.
They've been told to look the other way. Like they're not going to investigate these murders because they've been literally ordered to do so by Queen Victoria herself. And if we're talking about like the true crime shit about like the nature of these crimes and the Alan Moore's prime suspect, Dr. William Gull, or not the suspect, the actual killer.
Every deep playoff run starts with building an amazing team. Doing the same for your business doesn't take a room full of scouts. You just need Indeed. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Hate waiting? Indeed's US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Something I love about Indeed is that it makes hiring all in one place so easy because with virtual interviews, Indeed saves you time. You can message, schedule, and interview top talent all in one place. Indeed knows that when you're growing your business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why when you sponsor a job, you only pay for quality applications from resumes in our database matching your job description. Visit Indeed.com/Blue Wire to start hiring today. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire. That's Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Time is the thing. You cannot start without me. I start the clock.
Tar is being hailed by critics everywhere as one of the boldest and most exciting movies in years. Cate Blanchett is the winner of the Venice Film Festival's award for Best Actress for what Vanity Fair calls a towering performance. The Los Angeles Times raves Tar is astonishing, and the New York Times hails Tar will be one of the year's most talked about movies. Tar from Focus Features. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent. Now in select theaters. Everywhere October 28th.
The as savage as these murders were, I mean, like, people began speculating that it was a doctor or an educated person who did them, because like the ways in which these women's organs were removed and the cuts themselves that killed them were so precise that it was like speculated that it could not have been done by some, like, crazed wretch on the streets of the East End. These are very precise murders and surgical extractions.
If you actually look at someone who was like a tailor or a butcher, which is someone who might be living in that district, would have the similar skills. But one thing that was funny when they, when the first thing the cop said was, "Oh, this couldn't be an Englishman. No Englishman could possibly do this. It has to be one of those immigrants, possibly Jewish." They couldn't believe an Englishman could possibly do this. But as far as who the real mine hunters think probably did this is the profile, right? And it gets down to what Alan Moore investigates a lot in the book is the East End. A rich person who wants to murder poor people is not gonna risk himself going to the East End on the streets killing people. He's gonna, open a factory. He's gonna become a landlord. If he's a Mark the Sod sort of motherfucker, he's bringing people back to the castle.
A devil in the White City more than a Jack the Ripper.
Yes. You're going to do something like that. You're not, because these were risky crimes to do, and he didn't have a lot of time to spend with the victims, except the last one, Mary Kelly. Like, you're not going to do it out in the open, especially if you're trying to do some sort of Masonic ritual. Like, you generally take your time with that sort of thing. You don't do it out in the streets where anybody could see you. And he was seen by some people, almost certainly, but just unfortunately for the women, like, this was just a time where, like, no one was helping anybody. No one, the From Hill starts with the women just trying to find like enough money for a room, not even a room, a place to sleep for the night. And like one trick is like 3/4 of a room for a night. So that's where.
And they only get on the radar of Queen Victoria and Dr. William Gull because they attempt to blackmail the artist friend of Prince Albert, Eddie. Was Sickard? The guy Sickard? Like they just want some
Sickard.
money out of him because they're being extorted by a violent street gang to like take all their money that they earn.
Was really happening to some of those women.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's almost like he makes it about like. Yeah, the sickness that's in society. You know what I mean? Like, this is almost like inevitable that this had to happen, with the way things were in London at that time.
I mean, like that to me is like the most interesting part about this book is that like the murders themselves and like, it's obviously crimes that have fascinated people for over like a century now, but like Moore really makes it clear that like the murders themselves, like the crimes taking place here are larger than like the murders themselves. They are the manifestation of like the entire the culmination of Victorian England and the British Empire. And there's all these like touches he goes that are like in the acts themselves, like prophesize the atrocities of the 20th century.
Yeah, like the last words are, I think of the book are, I think a war is coming.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's even a moment where, like, during one of the murders, like they cut to like Austria, and there's like Adolf Hitler's conception takes place during one of the murders, or something like that, or there's like it's a reference to like.
Well, this one is very fun. This cutaway where Goal, I think maybe during the last murder, he sees us. He sees the 21st century. He sees us on them damn phones, and he's like, "Wow, I did all this to make a bunch of soy boys and cucks." Almost literally, he says this. He's like, "What the fuck did I do all this for? If this is all you're going to do with it, men."
This is we are now at the end of the century of masculinity, and look what it turned out. It turned out the softest ones that ever existed in history,
and a couple of horrific world wars as well.
Yeah, Gull's sort of look into what the next century is going to be. His like rhapsody, rapture that he goes into, in those final issues is really it's really great.
He's like mad that the women like dress like slutty. Like he's mad. He's like
he saw the world that he created, and he's still like, ugh, I hate it.
Yeah, but like in this like almost like orgasmic rapture as he like murders like one of his last victims, like he sees a vision of London at like the end of the 20th century, not the end of the 19th. And like he sees like the exact location where this murder took place. And again, like all of the architectural details in this book are exactly to a T, like correct. Like you could walk the same route, you could see the same buildings, and what he sees replacing it is this like giant gleaming tower of like glass and steel, and it's this like absolutely nightmarish moment for him.
Yeah, it is funny. It's like this sort of the ending. It's Alan Moore almost saying like, if you think like, it's almost him being like, even Jack the Ripper would be like most scared at just seeing what the world looked like today. This person capable of all this, like the scariest thing would be like what you see every day.
And we are going through Jerusalem, and Will, I know you've read it. I mean, and thank you so much for doing such a wonderful job editing it. It's pitch perfect. I haven't found one error so far.
Well, I must be clear as far as my editing job on it. I did not touch a single word or comma placement in the manuscript. It was just merely the American publication of it. I wouldn't dream of it, nor would I want to, because it's 1,000 pages long.
You had to change how they spelled gray every time. Like that's a lot. But he gets to this. He mentioned. I mean, Jerusalem is a lot about the oppressive architecture and how it gets worse. Like his characters talk about they're like complain about this building, and then you catch up with them 20, 30 years later and like, oh, I wish, or you catch up with their children and they're like, oh, I missed that building because they replaced it with this piece of shit. And just everything keeps getting worse and worse and worse. I don't know where I was going. I just was noticing that like there's no like upswing at the end of From Hell. Like Gold just wins. And
I mean, he might not win, because like in his sort of death dream at the end, he receives a vision of Mary Kelly in Ireland with the child who is the illegitimate Catholic heir to the crown of England, and he's having this ecstatic moment of achieving like godhood. And at the last minute, Mary Kelly's like sees him, like his ghost or his spirit, and she says like, go back to hell or something, and then he just dies and is nothing. So like he receives a vision of like he thinks that he has like finally come to fruition. He will become a god, and his efforts have played off. But nope, like that's just oxygen leaving your brain. That's just DMT hitting, and now you're dead. Now you're nothing forever.
just that I hadn't read before, as I mentioned earlier, this sort of afterword to the afterword. They did like Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell did like another short comic, that came out, I think, with the annotations, that was kind of all about all the different people that have been suspected to be Jack the Ripper.
Is this like the gull watching part where they're on the beach walking over the footsteps of other people, and like it's this metaphor for like historiography and gull catching.
And he kind of almost even cops to, he's like, it probably wasn't Gull. Like after making the whole book about how it's Gull, he's like, yeah, well, really what this is about is like being a part of like a larger, it was almost a weird chronicling of the origins of true crime, kind of through the Jack the Ripper case.
Reminds me of Zodiac in a lot of ways. Because that movie has like, obviously it's like they put the thumb down on the scale pretty heavy for it. It's John Carroll Lynch. I mean, I actually like, people, I know everyone says they've caught the Zodiac killer. It's just this guy who just died. But I mean, I still think it's Arthur Lee Allen because of the movie. But if you watch the Zodiac movie, is like, it's very interesting because like it leaves enough ambiguity that like maybe Arthur Lee Allen did a couple of those killings, but maybe many other of them could have just been done by people pretending to be, or just unrelated, just insane murders that took place in California at the same time. In that, like, like From Hell, it is a portrait of America at a very specific time and place.
I thought the afterward, the gull catching one was very interesting because it was also kind of toying with like, what is it about murders that we want to like look at so much, right? There's a very funny panel in it where he talks about how Jack the Ripper has become a circus, and it cuts to a billboard for the From Hell movie with Johnny Depp. That was a lot of fun. I thought that the afterward, again, I had missed it until now, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised by it. I recommend people don't miss it if you read From Hell.
I really like the concept they use is the Koch's snowflake, where he draws this circle, and the circle is all the information that we can really know about Jack the Ripper because it took place at a specific time and place, 100 years ago. And there's a triangle in it, and the triangle can, like a tesseract, just keep refracting the smaller and smaller pieces, and we can get more and more details about the lives. I mean, this is one of the most studied, probably the most studied criminal case in all of history. We have letters and stuff from the people. We have notes from the policemen. We know so much about this case to such a fine detail, but we can never know like who the killer really is because that circle is still surrounding like our realm of knowledge that's really possible about this because it took place in, before there was fingerprinting, before, there was DNA, before they knew to collect this evidence, et cetera, et cetera.
One of the things that I really liked or appreciated reading it this time, and also the first time, is another really cool thing they do is all of the cameos by historical figures that were in London of the era that, like, through a bit of like fictional license, like he has William Gull and other characters interact with, W.B. Yeats and the Elephant Man, John Merrick, and also the ghost of William Blake, like things like that. William Blake's painting, The Ghost of a Flea. Yeah, he inspires the painting, The Ghost of a Flea by William Blake.
Does he not also inspire Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Or when he's like going through time, he like...
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I'm remembering. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, he's always got to do a little bit of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemening, and he gets to like he also does it in Jerusalem too.
And Providence as well.
Yeah.
So
if someone was there, they should probably show up in the story. I mean, shit. I found out they were there at the time. Like, why not?
So as I said, we will be revealing who the killer is on this podcast. And Mind Hunters, if you have anything, please chime in. But I have been doing the research. I listened to John Douglas, our boy, the real Jack Crawford himself, and he has a book called The Cases That Haunt Us about Jack the Ripper. He goes through all the major suspects, including Gull. He's very dismissive of gold because of the stroke. And also, the simple fact is that if this were supposed to be some sort of royal cover-up, because people also think Eddie was the Jack the Ripper himself too, a syphilitic Eddie. He probably had syphilis, but we don't think
in the Victorian era. This is no bullshit. In the Victorian era, it is estimated that 1/4 of all adult men had syphilis.
Yeah, so he probably did have syphilis, but he did have alibis for basically all of the murders. The royal conspiracy is kind of out because if they were trying to cover something up, they probably wouldn't have committed the most talked about crime of of all time. That would be kind of counterproductive.
If this was a real op, they would have just like pushed them off a bridge or something and not painted walls with their blood in like the most fantastic way imaginable.
Now there's one kind of point storyline in this comic that might be a little bit confusing if you don't know the real case. This guy named Druitt who pops up, who was a real guy. He was a teacher accused of molesting a students at the boys' school that he taught at, and he was found dead around the time of the killings, and the killings shortly stopped. This killing stopped around the time he died, from apparent suicide, but he was also found with bricks in his pocket. Very odd case, but really he has no connection to the East End besides just happening to being dying around that same time. Douglas's theory, and this is kind of the thing, is like, so the around this time, obviously lots of anti-Semitism, right? But the actual criminal profile is that it probably was an immigrant. It probably was someone of the area that was impoverished, because very few people would have been able to make their way around that area, do several murders without being caught or seen or stopped. That this person probably was deeply personally disturbed. This is not someone who could be in the public eye or who could function as a doctor, who could even talk to women, who could even like have a real conversation with a woman. That's why the attacks were these quick, possibly quick blitz attacks, because he didn't think he could control these women. That's why they weren't brought back except for Mary Kelly, who had, and he didn't have money because he would have his own house to do something like this. He wouldn't do it on the streets or in Mary Kelly's place. So John Douglas's theory is that because of the rampant anti-Semitism, that the cops basically mixed up a few guys who fit this description in such a way that they didn't know that they had the guy. Like there's a guy named David Cohen and a guy but Cohen was a name like John Doe that they would just give Jewish men that they didn't know the last name of. And so you have these cops from these different jurisdictions, just like now they had city police and metro police and all these different jurisdictions taking these different notes about these by nature transient, poor, dirt poor men who, and to them they all look alike, they all dress alike, they're all animals. So his theory is that it was probably someone like that who probably died shortly after from some sort of, possibly just syphilitic syphilis.
From living in England in the 19th century.
Yeah, from living in England, and that's why the killing stopped. It wasn't some criminal mastermind. It probably wasn't somebody who was going to be sending letters to the paper. It wasn't somebody who wanted attention for what he was doing. It was someone with deep hatred of women, who was deeply uncomfortable around women and other people, and could only blend in, who blended in on the East End, but would have stuck out at, like, say, the royal court or in a hospital.
There we go. Crime solved.
Hey, look, far be it. Yeah, like, listen, I'm not a mind hunter, so all I can do is stand in awe of those who have the ability.
It is sad to say that it probably was like a poor immigrant, but that's like the thing where the cops erased the graffiti that says the Jews is the man who will not be blamed for nothing because he's afraid of an anti-Semitic mob was actually true. And there were anti-Semitic mobs patrolling the streets at night as soon as the killings started. That was the answer to the Jack the Ripper. They were going out hunting like immigrants.
I mean, I guess they did the right thing, really.
I guess he really did give birth to the 20th century.
Yes. Will, recommendations for Halloween?
I got 3 that I watched recently. We got David Cronenberg's The Brood. We've got Lucio Fulci's The Beyond.
I love that one. That's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Just absolute gore masterpiece. I'd actually never seen it. Brendan and I watched it the other night. It is like the gore in that movie is like on another level. It's hard to choose which scene is the best. Seeing eye dog bites out the throat of blind woman, or a guy gets his face eaten by tarantulas. It all takes place in a very weird, otherworldly New Orleans in which nobody sounds like they live in Louisiana.
But it actually is Louisiana, but he used Italian actors.
Yeah,
but
I know.
I actually point that to people like that's what Louisiana actually looks like. That bridge. Is so on the middle of the water.
Oh my God,
that's real. That's how you get to New Orleans.
Yeah, Louisiana is one of the 7 gateways to hell. The Beyond was awesome, and then also rounding out the Italians, watched Dario Argento's Phenomena, which was fucking awesome. Never
That's
seen
one
it.
I haven't seen.
It's a must watch. It's like later era Argento, but it is so fucking good.
See, that's the one I think might be good. I kind of don't fuck with the later Argento for obvious reason.
Like this is before he really falls off a cliff. But this is fucking. The Phenomenon is excellent. It is so fucking good.
Do you have anything to plug?
Just a regular, Chapo Trap House. Check us out on Patreon and SoundCloud.
That was Struggle Session presents Alan Moore. Peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, the moment of truth is upon us. For 100 years, authors, historians, criminologists have been puzzled by the question, who was Jack the Ripper? Now, 14% of our viewers believe Dr. Rosalind Donston was the Ripper. 18% believe he was M.J. Druitt. 25% voted for William Gull and the Royal Conspiracy. 23% believe the killer was Prince Albert Victor. And 20% believe Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. Turning now to the distinguished members of our panel, here is what the experts say. Forensic pathologist William Eckert.
It's my opinion that these crimes were committed by someone with a severe mental problem. I'm not a psychiatrist, but in cases of a similar nature I've had, it has been found that many of these people are very badly mentally troubled. I therefore feel that our most likely suspect here as the actual Ripper is Aaron Kosminski.
And Anne Mallew, member of the Queen's Counsel, barrister, judge.
Well, I think there's insufficient evidence to actually charge any one of these suspects, but the suspicion against Kosminski, I agree, is the strongest, and I think that for 4 reasons. Firstly, he lived locally and knew Whitechapel well. Secondly, the Middlesex Asylum, Coney Hatch Hospital records suggest strongly that he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Thirdly, according to the police officers Anderson and Swanson, he was positively identified by a witness as someone seen with Stride shortly before her death. And fourthly, according to Swanson, as soon as Kosminski was placed first of all under constant surveillance and then under restraint, the killings stopped.
FBI Special Agent Roy Hazelwood.
I would agree with the 2 previous opinions. I also believe Aaron Kosminski was responsible for these 5 mutilation murders. Of the 5 suspects, he was the only one who would not have been bothered by being sprayed with human blood. The others, I believe, would have been bothered by that. Also, his hatred of women is extremely well documented. And as I earlier stated, the mutilations involved in these crimes were motivated by an exaggerated hatred of women.
And from Scotland Yard, William Waddell.
Well, a murder inquiry in 1988 is essentially the same as one 100 years ago. From the point of view of a police inquiry, I come out in favour of Kosminski being the suspect. The evidence in the McNaughton notes of mentioning him his name initially and some of the evidence that's come to light since then makes me feel that he's more likely than any of the others.
And Special Agent John Douglas of the FBI.
Not to sound repetitious, but from a behavioral point of view, I definitely believe Kosminski would fit the general profile. If he didn't do it, someone just like him in Whitechapel committed this crime.
Well, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Experts for Donston, there are none. We are all unanimous that it was probably Kosminski. I say with great relief that we cannot at this distance be responsible for a miscarriage of justice. And thank you, Martin Fido, Donald Rumbelow, David Thomas, and Jan Leeming in London for all your help. And thanks to our panelists for engaging in this fascinating search for the secret identity of Jack the Ripper. Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, sleep well.